This video is not meant to judge people who have gone through divorce, nor to elevate those who have not. That is not the purpose. The purpose of this discussion is much simpler, yet far more profound. It is to explore how the experiences a person has passed through quietly shape the language they use, the judgments they make, and the way they interpret reality. In everyday life, we often ask people the same question, and yet the answers we receive can be astonishingly different. At first glance, we might assume the difference comes from personality, education, or values. But more often, the difference emerges from something deeper. It comes from how far someone has actually walked through the terrain of life. What realities have they confronted? What illusions have they lost? What kinds of consequences have they personally lived through? These experiences leave subtle fingerprints on how people speak. There is a profound idea found in the ancient spiritual text, often translated as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It suggests that human awareness does not mature instantly. Instead, it evolves through transitional passages, states of transformation where illusion falls away and reality becomes visible in a new form. These passages are called bardos, or intermediate states. They are not limited to death. In a broader philosophical sense, life itself contains many bardos moments where our previous assumptions collapse and a deeper understanding begins to emerge. Marriage can be one of those passages. Divorce can be another. Both are experiences that force individuals to confront the difference between romantic imagination and lived reality. And when people pass through such experiences, their way of interpreting relationships begins to change. Today, we will examine a simple but revealing question. A question that, surprisingly, can sometimes hint at whether someone has experienced marriage and divorce before. The question is this: when you hear about a couple who dated for many years and then eventually broke up, what do you think? At first, it appears like a casual question, but the answers often reveal the structure of someone's experience. Let us begin by looking at how people who have been through divorce often respond. Perspective one time does not guarantee compatibility. People who have experienced divorce often respond with a simple realization. Just because a couple was together for a long time doesn't mean they were truly compatible. This insight rarely comes from theory. It comes from experience. Many individuals who have gone through marriage have discovered that the length of a relationship does not guarantee its stability. Two people can spend years together, while fundamental differences quietly accumulate beneath the surface. Over time, the realization emerges that duration is not the same as harmony. In philosophical terms, this is an awakening from a certain illusion. The illusion that time itself proves the strength of love. But time is only a container. What truly matters is what repeats within that time, the patterns, habits, conflicts, and responsibilities that shape daily life. People who have passed through the reality of marriage often stop judging relationships by how long they lasted. Instead, they ask a different question. What was actually happening within those years? Perspective 2. Love alone is not enough. Another common response from those who have experienced divorce sounds like this: dating is about emotions, but marriage is about how two lives actually function together. During courtship, emotion plays the central role. Romantic attraction, excitement, and shared dreams create the foundation of the relationship. But marriage introduces another layer entirely: daily routines, financial responsibility, household roles, family dynamics. These realities slowly transform the relationship from an emotional bond into a shared life system. People who have experienced marriage firsthand often learn something difficult but essential. Love can start a relationship, but structure sustains it. When habits clash, when responsibilities are uneven, when expectations diverge, emotional affection alone cannot resolve every tension. This realization is not cynical. It is simply the perspective of someone who has already crossed a certain threshold of experience. Perspective 3. Breakups rarely happen without causes. Another response frequently heard from those who have gone through divorce is this: if a couple breaks up after many years, there were probably deeper reasons behind it. Instead of attributing the ending to fate or bad luck, experienced individuals tend to look for patterns and conditions, choices that accumulated over time, lifestyle differences that gradually widened, responsibilities that were avoided or unevenly carried. In other words, the end of a relationship is rarely random. It is usually the result of many small factors interacting over time. This perspective reflects a broader philosophical principle. Every outcome emerges from causes and conditions. People who have experienced the collapse of a relationship often begin to see these causal structures more clearly. They learn to interpret relationship endings not simply as emotional tragedies, but as systems that eventually reach their breaking point. Perspective: 4 small differences become large conflicts. Another observation often made by those with long-term relationship experience is this: the deeper a relationship becomes, the more small differences begin to matter. At the beginning of a relationship, differences can seem charming. Different habits feel interesting. Different personalities feel exciting. But when 2 lives fully merge, those differences become part of daily life. Sleeping schedules, money management, cleaning habits, communication styles, small mismatches repeated thousands of times can slowly evolve into major sources of tension. People who have lived inside long relationships often understand this dynamic very clearly. They know that intimacy has a paradox. The closer 2 people become, the more visible their differences become as well. Perspective 5. Reality eventually tests love. Finally, people who have experienced divorce often arrive at one difficult but important conclusion. Love alone does not determine whether a relationship survives. Other forces enter the picture: financial stress, responsibility, lifestyle compatibility, conflict management. These factors shape whether love can endure the pressures of everyday life. This does not mean love is meaningless, but it does mean that love must coexist with practical balance. Those who have lived through divorce often understand this intuitively. They no longer idealize love as an absolute force that can overcome everything. Instead, they see relationships as a balance between emotional connection and structural reality. A different perspective: those without divorce experience. Interestingly, people who have never experienced divorce often respond to the same question in very different ways. When they hear about a long-term couple breaking up, their first reaction might simply be surprise. They may think, "I didn't realize even long relationships could end." For them, the idea of a relationship lasting many years still carries an assumption of stability. They are not naive. They simply have not yet passed through the particular experiences that reshape that assumption. Others might react with curiosity. Why did they break up? What went wrong? Without personal experience, they often analyze such stories as lessons, data points that might help them avoid similar mistakes. Some may even reinterpret the breakup as a form of growth. They might say, maybe the breakup helped them grow as individuals. This perspective reflects a hopeful imagination. Because the weight of loss has not yet been fully experienced, it remains possible to see endings primarily through the lens of transformation. Experience shapes perception. When we step back and look at these responses side by side, something interesting becomes visible. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is not morality. The difference is experience. People who have passed through marriage and divorce often speak with a certain realism. Their answers emphasize structure, responsibility, and causality. People who have not passed through those experiences often speak with greater openness to possibility. Their answers emphasize emotion, curiosity, and growth. Neither perspective is inherently superior. They simply reflect different stages along the path of life experience. The deeper lesson. The deeper lesson here is not about divorce itself. It is about understanding how life experiences shape perception. When we listen carefully to how people interpret relationships, we are often hearing the quiet echoes of the paths they have walked. Their words are not just opinions, they are maps of experience. And when we recognize this, something important happens. We become less quick to judge. Instead, we begin to see that each person is speaking from a different place along the journey of life. If this discussion helped you see relationships and human experience from a deeper perspective, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with others. This channel is not about provoking emotional reactions. It is about exploring the quiet wisdom that emerges from lived experience. And sometimes the most revealing truths appear in the simplest questions. What people reveal when they talk about living together before marriage. At the end of the previous discussion, we arrived at an important realization. When people answer questions about relationships, they are not merely expressing opinions. They are speaking from the terrain of life they have already walked through. Some answers come from imagination. Others come from experience. And often, without realizing it, we reveal exactly where we stand on that journey. So let us continue the exploration with another simple question. Imagine asking a future daughter-in-law the following. When you see people around you who have lived together before marriage, what advantages or disadvantages do you think that experience has? It sounds like a casual question, but the answer often reveals something deeper about how a person understands relationships, commitment, and reality itself. Today, we will first examine how people who have never experienced divorce tend to interpret cohabitation and why their answers often follow a particular pattern of thinking. The first perspective, cohabitation is a place to learn. Consideration. Many people without divorce experience respond like this. Living together might help two people learn how to care for each other better. This answer reflects a very hopeful assumption about relationships. To them, cohabitation is not primarily a test of survival or conflict. Instead, it is seen as a learning environment. They imagine that sharing daily life naturally teaches patience, empathy, and understanding. Living together becomes something like a training ground for emotional maturity. From this perspective, relationships resemble a classroom. Two people enter with different habits and personalities, but through interaction, they gradually learn how to adjust to one another. The belief behind this answer is simple. If two people spend enough time together, they will eventually figure things out. In many ways, this is a beautiful belief. But it also reflects a stage of awareness that has not yet encountered the full complexity of long-term relational conflict. Because when someone has not yet experienced the collapse of a relationship, it is easier to imagine that difficulty automatically leads to growth. The second perspective, cohabitation as observation before commitment. Another common response sounds something like this. If people live together first, they can see each other's strengths and weaknesses more clearly. Here, the key idea is observation. For individuals without marriage or divorce experience, cohabitation often appears as a kind of preview of married life. Instead of jumping blindly into marriage, they believe couples can observe each other's daily habits beforehand. How does the other person handle stress? How do they manage money? How do they respond to conflict? Cohabitation becomes a window through which the hidden sides of a relationship can be seen. In psychological terms, this reflects a belief that more information leads to better decisions. If you collect enough data about your partner, you can determine whether the relationship will succeed. From this viewpoint, relationships function almost like complex decisions that can be optimized through observation. But this belief also reveals something important. The person speaking has not yet fully experienced the unpredictable nature of long-term shared life, because sometimes the deepest conflicts in relationships are not visible in observation alone. They emerge only when responsibility becomes unavoidable. The third perspective, cohabitation as preparation for marriage. A third answer frequently appears. Living together before marriage might help people prepare for married life. In this view, cohabitation is interpreted as a rehearsal. It allows couples to practice the routines of everyday living before making a permanent commitment. Cooking together, paying bills together, sharing space and responsibilities. All of these are imagined as exercises that prepare individuals for the larger structure of marriage. Notice the psychological structure behind this belief. Marriage is not yet perceived as a point of irreversible transformation. Instead, it is seen as something that can be approached gradually, almost like learning a new skill. Try first, adjust, then commit. This idea reflects an assumption that life's major decisions can be carefully managed through preparation. And in many areas of life, that assumption works. But relationships contain elements that cannot always be rehearsed. Some realities appear only when the commitment itself becomes real. The fourth perspective, cohabitation as a relationship test. Another response often sounds like this: living together is a good way to see if the relationship truly works. In this perspective, cohabitation becomes a kind of test. If the couple gets along while sharing daily life, the relationship passes. If conflict becomes overwhelming, the relationship fails. The underlying assumption is that compatibility can be measured through experience before marriage takes place. But this perspective also reveals an important psychological distance. People who have not yet experienced divorce often believe that relationships remain fully reversible until the moment of marriage. They imagine that if problems appear during cohabitation, the couple can simply walk away without major consequences. And in some cases, that is true. But the deeper realities of relationships sometimes reveal themselves only after emotional, social, and structural commitments become intertwined. The fifth perspective, cohabitation as a time to reflect. Finally, many individuals without divorce experience express a more cautious thought. If they realize they are not compatible, living together might give them time to think about their future. This answer reflects a preventive mindset. Rather than rushing into marriage, cohabitation is seen as a pause, a space where individuals can reconsider their decision. The emphasis here is not conflict or preparation, but time. Time to reflect, time to reconsider, time to make a careful choice. This reveals a powerful belief that relationships can be safely managed by slowing down decisions. And again, this belief emerges naturally from people who have not yet experienced the full structural consequences of a failed marriage. Because once legal, financial, and familial bonds are formed, decisions are no longer so easily reversible. A pattern begins to appear. If we step back and examine all these responses together, a clear pattern emerges. People without divorce experience tend to interpret cohabitation as something that allows them to learn, observe, prepare, test, and reconsider. Every answer points toward the future. Every answer assumes that more experience now can prevent failure later. This perspective is not foolish. In fact, it is deeply human. When we have not yet encountered certain forms of loss, it is natural to believe that careful preparation can prevent them. A different tone appears. However, when the same question is asked of people who have experienced divorce, the tone of the conversation often changes. Their answers tend to shift away from possibility and towards structure. They speak less about learning and more about responsibility, less about observation and more about consequences, and less about hope and more about sustainability. Not because they are cynical, but because their perspective has already passed through a certain threshold of reality, experience, and the language we use. So when we ask someone a simple question about living together before marriage, we may unknowingly hear something much deeper. We are hearing the language of experience. Some people speak from anticipation. Others speak from memory. Some speak about possibilities. Others speak about consequences. Neither voice is wrong. They simply come from different stages along the path of life. The question that follows, which leads us to an even more interesting question. When people who have experienced divorce look at other couples going through divorce around them, what do they feel is the most tragic part of it? Is it the loss of love, or is it something deeper within the structure of life itself? In the next lecture, we will explore this question through another simple conversation one that reveals why people who have gone through divorce often speak less about emotion and more about the collapse of everyday life structures. If this discussion helped you see relationships and human experience from a deeper perspective, consider subscribing and sharing this video with others. This channel is not about provoking emotions. It is about understanding how life experiences quietly reshape the way we see the world. And sometimes, the deepest truths appear in the simplest questions.